So a little bit of housekeeping before this video starts. Number one, YouTube doesn't support Dolby Vision. So the video that you're going to be seeing off the iPhone is as close an approximation to the high dynamic range format as I can get while still keeping YouTube happy. Number two, I know that S-Log is not a high dynamic range format, but it's what I'm most familiar with, and I know that S-Log 3 exists. So I am just more comfortable with that and can talk more about S-Log 2 than S-Log 3. And number three, you're watching it compressed through YouTube, so it's already going to be losing a lot of dynamic range, assuming your phone or whatever device you're watching this on can even support full high dynamic range of any kind. And I guess four, it was filmed by me, an idiot, so take that with a grain of salt. But let's talk about S-Log versus HDR Dolby Vision. Well, it snowed today, which means there's a ton of contrast between the snow, the sky, the trees, and I figured now would be a perfect time to do a video that I planned to do quite a while ago, which was talking about the difference between log profile video and HDR, such as Dolby Vision, which is what you're watching me through right now, on the iPhone 12 Pro Max. So let's get into what the difference is between log profiles and HDR. Holy cow, is it cold out there. My hands actually swelled up during the recording of these outdoor sessions. Wear gloves, kids. Anyway, S-Log and Dolby Vision. What are they? When do you use them? Which is better? We're going to talk about that today, starting with the one that I'm most familiar with, and actually the one you're watching me through right now, which is log. So let's get into it. So log is short for logarithmic color gamut, and what it really means is that when you shoot in this format, you capture a lot of detail for light in both the highlights and the lowlights. This profile is designed to keep the highlights from going too high and peaking the sensor, while also making sure that the low light areas retain detail that can be pulled out later in editing. Now, when you first look at a log video file, whether it's imported or off the camera, it's going to look a bit like this. Kind of boring, very flat, not a whole lot of contrast going on. So visually, it's nothing really that impressive. This is where log's benefits really start to shine. So I'm staying in this flat profile for a minute just to give you an example. You'll notice, and I'm looking at my monitor over here, my face is a little high on the highlights, a little overexposed on this side, and that light behind me is more white than blue. And the TV's kind of dark. That I'm not really going to be able to do much with, but you see my shirt's more kind of a grayish color than black. All these things are what the log profile is capturing, but when I actually spend the time to color grade it, this is what it looks like afterwards. This is much more blue. This looks more like the actual shirt I'm wearing. It's not too bad on the TV, but that's the idea, is creative freedom with the detail captured in the sensor. Now, a log profile, in this instance specifically S-Log, can capture up to 14 stops of dynamic range. Now, I'm not going to get into f-stop and how that will affect the camera, but I will give you an idea of what that range means. Your human eye, the eye that you have in your head, assuming you're not blind, in which case, thanks for listening to the video, but for those of you who aren't blind, this is our best camera, our eye, and it's able to see up to 20 to 21 stops of dynamic range. 14 stops is actually pretty good for a camera. But this means that it's up to the editor afterwards to bring out the details, bring down the highlights, bring up the lowlights, however they want it to look. But the good thing is they can do that, and they can do it however they'd like. That is really cool. Creative freedom with S-Log is amazing, which is one of the reasons why I shoot on it. I have two different emitting sources of light behind me in any of my regular videos. This light, it's fairly dark. I can kind of bring the detail up as much as I want, but I do struggle depending on whether the auto brightness of the TV plays along, which, whatever. And this one, this is very bright, but I can bring out way more detail with it and actually have it look blue instead of white. And do all this while keeping myself properly exposed. All right, so you might be thinking, sweet, I can shoot with 14 stops of dynamic range, I can keep all of this highlight detail and all this low light detail, and it's great. I can do all these things and have all this creative freedom, and you are correct, but there are a few things that you have to do before you even press the record button that may mean that in certain scenarios, log might not be the format you'd want to shoot in. So to give you an idea of what I do before every shoot, I turn on 3 key lights. I have one there, and one there. And then I look through the camera and make sure that my ISO and my aperture are set exactly where I need them to be set. This is so that I can actually keep my exposures consistent, because I can't really play with automatic settings because they don't know how to compensate for log. This means that run and gun shooting is not ideal in a log profile. Here's an example. Now, if you'll forgive the poor framing and angle, this camera is shot with log. Now that means that beforehand, I actually have to go in and set the camera to exactly what I want before even planning the shoot. So I have to know what ISO I need to set it to. I need to know the aperture. Shutter speed's pretty much fixed, solely because of the fact that you can't really go changing shutter speed if you know your frame rate. But I have to play with all of that, and if I get it wrong, which I probably did in this shot, I actually then have to go in and change it later and try to pull out as much detail as I can. So it's a much more detail-oriented and time-consuming process. So in some instances, that might mean that shooting in the standard profile or the cinema profile might be better because these cameras are more tuned for automatic settings on a linear profile, something that basically picks all the colors and details for you. And this is where Dolby Vision on the iPhone 12 Pro and Pro Max comes in, because this is where you can get more colors and more brightness options, but still with a few caveats. So let's now talk about HDR with Dolby Vision. So Dolby Vision itself is a standard from Dolby Labs, and this is a standard that is dynamic range, sort of the best way to describe it. So HDR in general, which you can't really classify log as HDR, but standard HDR, it's a weird thing to say, regular HDR has a single piece of metadata letting the television or display you're watching the video through know what to set the brightness and all of its settings. Now, when it comes to the settings on the TV, that means your TV actually has to be able to support it, or rather the screen you're watching it through has to support it. So without bringing the bright levels of this video way down, this is what it's going to look like. However, thankfully, you can play with that, but it does put a little extra work on it, sort of like what you have to do with a log profile anyway, so you kind of got to pick your battles. This means that some scenes that are brighter might not get bright enough while the shadows might be perfect, or vice versa, something that is supposed to be darker isn't. So it's not the best sort of setup. That's where Dolby Vision comes in. Dolby Vision lets you set up per frame, per shot, per scene, different kinds of metadata. So you can have certain scenes that are brighter and still keeping the details proper in the shadows and the highlights, darker scenes turning everything way down for the brightness. You name it, you can set it up that way on your color profile. Now, this means that because the profiles are set by a human, normally what you would have before this would be either a very flat profile or a very, very wide profile. And then it would take a human grading it basically by hand, either per frame, per scene, or per shot. And this would mean that you are getting a human touch, a human's attention to detail. Now, the iPhone is doing this by computer, which means that all the stuff you're seeing here, the brights in the background being brought down for the sky, or the snow being exposed, these trees being exposed, all that is being done by a computer. So you might be lacking a little bit of attention to detail, whereas with log, my camera here and my actual eye for this stuff, you actually have a per frame by human, so you can get a little more detail. That tends to be the advantage with this kind of shooting. As I mentioned before, log profiles let the creator choose everything. And while you do have some editing options afterwards with the iPhone, you don't have many, and the detail captured, or rather the light detail captured, only lets you do so much with it. I'm committing one of the cardinal sins of video, which is that I have the sun directly behind me and it still sees my face. That's really cool. Anyway, this means that the Dolby Vision standard is actually something graded manually in most cases onto a video feed, not something done automatically like a cinema color profile or a LUT. However, Apple has sort of made it that you can kind of have Dolby Vision as a standard automatically. But again, like I said, it's mainly relying on artificial intelligence to properly grade your video, not a human hand. And actually, speaking of editing, this is something I ran into. Final Cut still, even after 2 updates, still does not have official support for Dolby Vision, which means that when I import this, I actually have to attach what's called an HDR tool that Apple includes with Final Cut. So that actually means that the brightness that my camera saw is too much for the standard that my video is actually trying to work with. That really sucks, because that means that a lot of the even exposure you would normally get is just completely blown out unless you do a ton of work to play with it. Okay, so what are my options? You're telling me that I can't import it into Final Cut, so what am I supposed to do? Well, technically Adobe Premiere supports it. I had some issues getting it to play nice. I actually had the best experience with iMovie. Now, I hate iMovie. But it isn't too bad when it comes to editing these videos because it actually knows what to do with them. But because you have to take it through iMovie first to actually see the effects of the video you're recording, that means that professional options aren't really a thing, since iMovie is not professional, Final Cut doesn't know what to do with it, and Adobe Premiere kind of doesn't know what to do with it. So while the idea of the iPhone automatically doing all of that color grading work for you in-house is really cool, it all goes away if you have to use Final Cut because, well, look what happens as soon as you pick, okay, fine, I'm not going to use HDR. Oh my god, it's so overexposed. So, that sucks. So at the end of the day, S-Log, I have to do a ton of work to make it look good, and Dolby Vision, if I do my little iMovie trick, can look really good without any extra work. So am I going to switch to HDR with Dolby Vision? No. No, I'm not at all. It's neat, but here. I'll give you an analogy to why I'm still going to shoot on S-Log, but why I think that this technology is actually very cool and has a lot of potential. So I drive a manual transmission car with no automatic brakes, no traction control, no nothing like that, which in weather like this is kind of scary for most people who aren't familiar with that kind of stuff. But having that extra level of control means that you can put some touches to your driving style that you would not get on newer cars that change gears for you and choose whether or not you should be braking, how hard you should be braking, and things like that. I have no problem with vehicles that do that, and I will drive them. It's easy, it's very easy considering what I normally drive, but I don't like it personally because I like to be able to have as much control as possible. This is the same reason why on a phone like this, if I am in a pinch and I need to grab a quick shot and I have no control really over the color grading, that's fine, because I just need to grab a quick shot. I don't need to do anything special with it. I'm going to throw it up on YouTube and that's going to be the end of the story. However, if I have the option to actually set up the lights, set up the camera, pick my settings, the whole 9 yards, you know that I'm going to do that because it gives me more of an opportunity to properly set up a shot that I'll be more proud of. I think the potential with this HDR format is really cool, and I think that if Apple finally wakes up and puts full Dolby Vision support into Final Cut, I might play around with it a little more. But as it stands right now, Dolby Vision done by a professional who knows how to properly grade a video to that standard can be amazing. But letting a computer do it isn't quite as amazing, and it comes with too many caveats to make it something reliable. S-Log, on the other hand, is something I've had years of practice with, and on top of that, already does a pretty good job of retaining the color detail, meaning the only thing that I usually have to play with is the exposure. I think that that's worth the trade-off to do a little extra work with the exposure versus having to import-export with iMovie and then... Anyway, I'm not getting back into that. S-Log, for me, through Sony's cameras, is a really great format. I'm going to stick with it, and for people who are just looking to pick up an iPhone, grab and go and run, and most of your work's going to be through iMovie on the iPad, or you're going to mostly do the work on your phone, have fun. Dolby Vision on this thing is actually really impressive. It's just not up to the professional standards yet. You can't trust a computer to do what a highly trained human can do. At least not yet. Maybe the iPhone 13 will prove me wrong, but until then, I'm going to stick to my Sony with the log profiles. But for grab and go, I think that I can now trust the iPhone's color grading, light retention, and detail enough to use it for pickup shots. I kind of trusted the iPhone 11 Pro, but with the bigger sensor of the iPhone 12 Pro Max, I'm actually really impressed. So expect more pickup shots with the iPhone 12, but don't expect an entire video recorded on that yet. But either way, that's been it. HDR on the iPhone versus Sony's S-Log profile and log in general. I'm still sticking with log, but I like what they're doing so far. Either way, guys, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. And apart from that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Make sure to be there and have a good one.